I didn't see it coming, not in the blunt way it arrived. There had been signs, her silence stretched longer at dinner, her eyes sliding off mine toward the television, her sudden patience with messes that used to bother her. But the rupture itself was quick, public, and calculated as if she'd rehearsed it. It was a Sunday afternoon. Our neighbor Helen had dropped in to return a casserole dish. I was rinsing mugs at the sink when I heard my wife laugh too loudly in the living room. Then her words cut clean through the walls. "You know, Mark just doesn't get it. I need stability. I can't spend my whole life worrying if his dreams will ever pay off." Helen gave the kind of sympathetic hum people make when they don't want to be caught on either side. I froze with water still running over my hands. I stepped out, towel in hand, but she didn't flinch. She turned to me almost casually, like she had decided the best way was straight through. "You've made everything feel uncertain," she said. "I can't live like this anymore. I'd rather have comfort than chaos." Her choice of word, comfort, landed sharper than any insult. As if my years of double shifts, the quiet covering of overdue bills, the patience with her father's endless demands, were nothing but noise. She made it sound as though I had brought her instability, when I had been the one carrying the weight she never acknowledged. Helen excused herself, embarrassed, and the door clicked shut. For a moment the house was too still. My wife leaned back on the couch, arms crossed, as if the case was already closed. "You'll be fine," she added, softer but more cruel. "You always land on your feet. I want something easier. And Paul?" She hesitated only briefly. "Paul understands that." There was. Not even hidden. Paul, her coworker, the man who never once had to stay up at midnight balancing numbers against grocery lists. The man whose name I'd seen appear on her phone, dressed up in jokes and late-night emojis. I wanted to argue, to lay out every receipt, every sacrifice. But the truth pressed in. Arguing would only cheapen it further. She had already decided, already packaged me as the burden standing between her and this shining idea of comfort. I looked around the room. The sagging armchair I'd repaired twice. The cheap clock on the wall I'd bought so we wouldn't be late paying fees again. All of it invisible to her. I went upstairs quietly, pulled a small duffel from the closet. I didn't take clothes beyond the basics. Just the worn keychain her brother had given us when we moved in, a brass house key with a faded blue tag. It wasn't worth anything, but it felt like the truest symbol of what was ending. When I came back down, she barely looked up. Only muttered, "You're really going to make this dramatic?" "No," I said. And I wasn't. I left the rest unsaid. The front door closed behind me with a final weight I hadn't expected. The air outside was cool, sharp. For the first time in years, I felt lighter and more lost in the same breath. I didn't slam the door, didn't curse, didn't beg. Silence was all I carried with me. Silence and the key in my pocket, cold against my palm. The room above the bar was nothing, cracked plaster, a single bulb that hummed like it was dying. But it was mine. I carried my duffel up the narrow stairs and dropped it on the floor. That was the sound of my new life starting. Hollow, unimpressive, but free of her voice. At first the silence gutted me. I'd wake in the night reaching for her, only to clutch the cold air. The quiet pressed down like a weight. Yet, slowly I began to see the silence for what it was, space. No bills left on the counter with an unspoken expectation. No clipped sighs about my chaos. No phone buzzing at midnight with Paul's name half hidden on the screen. She thought she'd chosen comfort. But every corner of that comfort had been paid for with my hours, my patience, my back bent over late shifts. Without me, she would feel the edges of it. I thought I'd vanish into obscurity, but life doesn't let you. A week later, my coworker Jenna passed me in the break room, lowered her voice, and said, "Saw your wife at the cafe with Paul." She looked tense. I shrugged, but inside I filed it away. Later that night, another piece. The landlord called me by mistake, still using my number, asking if the rent would be on time this month. I told him it wasn't my problem anymore. His grunt said enough. Bits of her unraveling reached me like smoke under a door. Paul's car broke down. She had to take the bus. She missed a work deadline. People noticed she was distracted. The image of ease she had clung to was already fraying. But the real twist came on a Thursday evening when I returned to the bar and found an envelope shoved under my door. No name, just my own scrawled across the front in her handwriting. Inside, one utility bill, overdue, with my name still listed as primary. Nothing else. No note. Just the proof that she couldn't keep the lights on without me. I sat on the edge of the bed with that bill in my hand, and for the first time since walking out, I laughed. Not cruelly. Not with triumph. Just a low, cracked laugh at the irony. She had chosen comfort, but comfort had already started begging me to come back in the form of a final notice. I didn't pay it. I folded the bill once, slid it into the notebook where I was tracking everything she had once dismissed as invisible labor. Page 1. The gas bill. The radiator hissed behind me. The silence was no longer heavy. It was sharpening, cutting. For the first time, I realized the retreat wasn't weakness. It was a front-row seat to the collapse she thought could never happen. And I intended to watch every second. I kept the envelope. Not because I intended to pay it, but because it was proof, the first visible crack. I pressed it flat into the notebook where I was already listing everything I had once covered without acknowledgement. It became page 2. Page 1 had the gas bill. Page 2, electricity. I knew there would be more. In the room above the bar, strategy didn't come as some grand revelation. It arrived in fragments. A phone call here, a chance remark there. My plan was less about action than restraint. Doing nothing but doing it with precision. The first move was practical. I closed our joint bank account. She hadn't noticed it was still under my control. She assumed, as always, that I was too meek to sever ties. I transferred my savings into a new account she couldn't touch. I left just enough behind to make it look like an oversight. A few $100s, a decoy. The second move was quieter. I spoke to a lawyer. Not for divorce yet, not for revenge. Just consultation. I learned what debts were legally hers, what liabilities I no longer had to carry. The lawyer looked bored, like it was routine, but I left the office with a steadier spine. Knowledge, after all, was another kind of weapon. Meanwhile, news trickled in. Paul had been passed over for a promotion. Someone at her job mentioned she'd snapped at a client. And then another envelope came, slipped under my door at night. Water bill, overdue. This time she didn't even bother addressing it. Just shoved it into my world like I'd pick it up out of habit. I didn't. Instead, I began to catalog. Every bill became a tally mark. Every whispered update from friends became another entry. Rent late. Car repair postponed. Fights overheard in the cafe where she used to laugh too loudly. Still, I didn't call her. Didn't confront Paul. I wanted them to believe I had disappeared, to assume I was licking wounds, too proud or too broken to return. That illusion was part of the plan. The longer they underestimated me, the cleaner the break would be when reality hit them. But silence isn't passive. I began to prepare for what came next. I requested copies of past utility statements. I kept receipts. I organized them by date, highlighting every payment I had made alone. It was tedious, unglamorous work, but that was exactly the point. The same invisible labor she had once dismissed would become my ledger of truth. On nights when the loneliness clawed at me, I took walks. Not random ones, deliberate routes past places where I knew they might be. I never stopped, never revealed myself. I just observed. From across the street, I saw them leaving the cafe one evening. She looked thinner, her face tight, the laugh gone. Paul walked ahead of her, phone in hand, barely looking back. The picture told me everything I needed. Comfort was already eroding, and he didn't have the strength to carry what I had carried. The temptation to interfere tugged at me. To send a message, to let her know I was watching. But restraint is harder than confrontation. I reminded myself, silence is sharper. Absence is heavier. One night, I came back to find a third envelope under my door. This one wasn't a bill. It was a note in her handwriting, "We need to talk. Please." I didn't answer. I slid it between the pages of my notebook like another exhibit in a growing case file. Not a case for court, not yet. A case for myself. A case for the moment when I would no longer be the discarded one but the one holding all the proof, all the quiet power. Strategy, I realized, wasn't about revenge in the loud sense. It was about patience. It was about letting reality do the dismantling for me. So I waited. I kept my records. I tightened the walls around my life until nothing of hers could leak in. And outside those walls, the comfort she chose was already starting to rot. Collapse doesn't happen in one loud moment. It begins in whispers, in the little things. I saw it unfold like a series of faint tremors before the earth finally split. The first tremor came when I overheard Jenna again in the break room at work. She wasn't speaking to me directly this time, just chatting with another coworker. But I caught her words as she stirred sugar into her coffee. "Did you hear about Anna? She had to borrow money from her sister to cover rent. And Paul, he's furious about it." I kept my head down, shuffled my papers, pretended I wasn't listening. But inside, I wrote the words in bold. Borrowed money. Furious. Rent unpaid. The foundation was shaking. The second tremor arrived in the form of another envelope, slipped under my door like contraband. This one was different, a pink final notice for the electricity bill. Scrawled across it in her handwriting was a single word, help. I stared at it for a long time. Once upon a time, I would have moved heaven and earth to spare her this humiliation. Paid the bill, hidden the evidence, protected her from the shame of falling short. But that man was gone. I folded the notice, slid it between the other pages in my growing ledger, and let the lights go out in her new comfort. Weeks passed, and the tremors grew louder. Friends who once looked at her with admiration now spoke with barely concealed pity. "She doesn't look happy," one said. Another whispered that Paul had started going out late, alone. The gossip moved through town like smoke, curling around every corner, impossible to ignore. I didn't have to hunt for these updates. They found me. People enjoy reporting on downfall. It makes them feel steadier in their own lives. And in each whispered update, I heard confirmation. Absence has a weight. My absence, in particular. One afternoon, walking home, I paused across the street from their building. The curtains were half drawn. Through the gap I saw them arguing, her hands flailing, his arms folded across his chest, his body angled away from her. Even without sound, the picture was clear. He wasn't her comfort anymore. He was her cage. And then came the break. On a gray Wednesday morning, I woke to a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Anna herself, hair unwashed, eyes rimmed red. She held no envelope this time, just herself. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside, motioned her in. She didn't sit. She paced the length of the room, words tumbling out. "I can't do this anymore. Paul's not who I thought he was. He doesn't help, he doesn't care, he says everything's my fault. The bills, the rent, everything. He told me I should go ask you. That you'd know how to fix it." I stood against the wall, arms folded, silent. She stopped pacing, looked at me with the same eyes that once told me I was the burden, the chaos, the problem. "I thought," she began, voice cracking, "I thought I was choosing stability. But it's falling apart. Everything's falling apart." Her voice carried desperation, but underneath it was something sharper, fear. The safety net she'd thrown herself into was threadbare, and she was only now realizing it. For a moment, I almost softened. Old instincts tugged at me, fix this, steady her, carry the weight again. But then I remembered the scene in our living room, her words to Helen, the way she had framed me as chaos. I let the silence stretch until she couldn't bear it. Finally, she whispered, "Please." I said nothing, only walked to the table, picked up the notebook, and opened it to the middle pages. Bills, receipts, overdue notices, her handwriting scrawled across the margins. I laid it in front of her. She flipped through it, her face paling with each page. Proof of everything she had dismissed. Proof that comfort had never been hers, it had been mine, carried on my back. When she looked up, her lips parted, but no sound came. I closed the book gently, slid it back toward me. "You wanted comfort," I said, voice even. "Now you know what it costs." She left not long after, shoulders slumped, without another word. The door closed, and the room returned to silence. But the collapse didn't stop there. Word spread that she'd missed another payment. Paul, unable to carry the load, slipped out of her life quietly, like a man sneaking from a burning house. Soon she was alone in the apartment, curtains drawn, blinds closed, the comfort she'd once chosen now a suffocating prison. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I only watched, recorded, and waited. Collapse, after all, wasn't something I had to orchestrate. It was inevitable. And I had the best seat in the house. Confrontations don't arrive as sudden storms. They creep in like fog, soft at first, until you can't see the street in front of you. The fog reached me through small signals. A voicemail from Helen, her voice brittle. "Mark, please call me. It's important." A landlord's office leaving a message, trying to press old debts onto me. And then, the message that ended the waiting. "Cafe, 5 o'clock. Please." She never used please with me before. I walked in at 5. The cafe was half empty, filled with the clink of cutlery and the hiss of milk frothers. The ordinary sounds kept everything from collapsing under its own weight. She sat in the corner, a too thin jacket pulled tight, her hair scraped back as if neatness could disguise the exhaustion etched across her face. She looked smaller, not physically but in presence, like someone who had been living in dim rooms too long. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was soft, fraying at the edges. I set the notebook on the table between us. My hand stayed on it, as though it were a legal document needing a witness. "I was wrong," she said immediately, before I could speak. "I thought I wanted comfort. I told myself stability mattered more than anything. But I see now, I had stability because you carried it. You did all the things I thought just happened." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She seemed past tears. I didn't notice because I didn't want to notice. I let silence fill the gap. She had to feel it. "Paul left," she continued, the name bitter in her mouth. "No fight. No closure. Just a note on the counter. I hope you find what you're looking for." What I was looking for. She gave a short, cracked laugh. "Turns out he couldn't carry the load for a month. Turns out I can't carry it either." Her voice broke on the last word. She reached for her coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down with shaking hands. "What do you want from me?" I asked. My tone was flat, not cruel but stripped of softness. "Not money," she said quickly. "I know better than that now. She stopped, searching for words. "I don't know what to do." I turned the notebook toward her and opened it. Pages of receipts, overdue notices, her handwriting scrawled across envelopes. Proof of every invisible act she had once dismissed. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. The truth sat heavy enough between us. "You wanted comfort," I said. "Now you know what it costs." Her lips pressed tight. Finally, she nodded. "I can take it. I'll take it. I have to." She surprised me with her next words. "The lease, it's still in both our names. I'll take it on myself. I'll sign for the arrears. Will you help me transfer it?" That was at least honest. For the first time, I saw her face without the defenses, the excuses. Just fatigue finally admitting its source. "I'll sign," I said. "But on conditions." She straightened, bracing. "Name them." 1. You assume every debt in writing. No shadows left on my back. 2. No third parties. No landlords, no friends, no managers calling me. If there's something, you face me directly. 3. You stop telling stories where I'm the villain. You tell the truth, or you tell nothing. You don't get to rewrite this. She absorbed each condition like a stone dropped into her hands, heavy but undeniable. Then she nodded once. "Yes. All of it." The next day, we sat across from each other in the leasing office, a sterile glass box with gray chairs. The manager pushed papers across the desk like a judge reading a verdict. She signed with steady hands. I signed my release. When it was over, she turned to the manager. "Remove his number from your records," she said. "From now on, you deal with me." For the first time in months, I almost believed her. Outside, on the sidewalk, she stopped me. Her voice was quieter now, not desperate but reflective. "I miss the porch light you used to leave on. I thought it was nothing, just a habit. But it meant I never had to put my key in the dark. I see now that you kept 100 lights on I never noticed. You'll learn where the switch is, I told her. She looked down at the pavement. I'm going to try. That evening, my phone buzzed. 2 words in her name, paid today. No punctuation. No apology. Just a fact. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, outside the bar, I found Paul leaning against the wall, coat collar up, trying to look casual. Got a minute? He asked, as if we were colleagues sharing a smoke break. You already had your minutes, I said. He half smiled, sheepish. She told me about the bills. The lease. Said you handled it. I didn't. She did. He nodded, almost relieved to hear it. I wanted to say, I'm not the villain. Neither am I said. He blinked at that as though the simplicity unsettled him. He shuffled his feet, searching for ground. You're better at this than I am. The carrying. Practice, I said. And respect. He gave a small shrug, turned away, and walked off. His shoulders slumped under a weight he would never really hold. The real ending came not with Paul, not even with the lease transfer, but with the silence that followed. No more envelopes slid under my door. No more late-night calls from managers or friends. Just absence, clean, final. One last text from her, I'll manage. I placed it in the notebook, not as evidence against her but as proof that the confrontation had finally shifted. She wasn't asking me to carry. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was, at last, admitting the weight was hers. And that, I realized, was all I had ever needed. For weeks after the cafe and the lease office, I waited for the old cycle to reassert itself, for a late-night knock, another envelope shoved under my door, a story told in town where I was once again the villain. But nothing came. The silence held. It was different this time. Not the sharp, lonely silence of my rented room, but something steadier, almost dignified. She had accepted the weight. And in that acceptance, the balance shifted. The next time I saw her was by accident. I was walking past the grocery store when she came out, carrying 2 bags too heavy for her frame. She nearly stumbled on the curb. Our eyes met. For a moment I thought she would rush over, collapse into please. Instead, she adjusted her grip and gave me a small nod. No words, just acknowledgement. She carried the bags herself. That nod said more than any apology could. Later she called. Not a desperate call but deliberate. Mark, she said, I signed a hardship plan with the utilities. The arrears are mine now. I've taken a second job. I thought you should know. You didn't need to tell me, I said. I did, she replied. Not because I want you to fix it. Because I want you to know I'm fixing it. For the first time, she sounded like someone standing on her own floor. I realized then that the ultimate revenge was never mine to orchestrate. It wasn't shouting or triumph, or even the collapse itself. It was this, watching the person who once dismissed me as chaos finally respect the labor that had always been invisible. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She asked only to be seen doing the work herself. Still I had terms. The confrontation at the cafe had been about proof. The shift was about boundaries. One evening she called again, hesitating before speaking. Do you think, someday, we could try again? I let the silence linger long enough for her to feel it. No, I said. Not as it was. Not in the same shape. She breathed in shaky but steady. I thought you'd say that. I think I needed to hear it. What you needed, I said, was to learn that respect comes before love. Not after. Not as decoration. Before. On the other end, she didn't argue. She didn't beg. She only whispered, "You're right." That was the shift. Not her regret, not her fear, but her acknowledgement of something she once mocked, that dignity can't be bargained away, and comfort without respect is a cage. The next day, she sent me a message. Short, simple, I'll never rewrite this story. Not again. And she hasn't. I kept the keychain. I keep the notebook. Not as chains binding me to the past, but as reminders. The key reminds me that homes can be lost, but dignity cannot. The ledger reminds me that invisible work carries the heaviest weight, and that silence, when chosen, can be sharper than any revenge. As for her, she carries her own weight now. I don't watch closely. I don't need to. Once, I thought the end of our story would be her begging to return. I see now that the real ending was quieter, her carrying her own bags out of a grocery store, not asking me to take them. The shift wasn't hers alone. It was mine. I stepped out of the role of carrier, of fixer, of man in the dark with the porch light always on. I chose something else, to live in a world where my silence speaks for itself, where absence proves more than presence ever could. And when I walk home at night, the streets unlit and ordinary, I don't mind. I know where the switches are. Always did. Life didn't give us a dramatic ending. No slammed doors, no final scene with an audience. Just choices made in quiet places, where no one but the two of us would ever know. The choice came one evening in the form of a single message. Paul called. He wants to meet. I said no. That was it. No explanation, no anger, no confession. Just a clean refusal. She had decided, the man she once chose for his ease would no longer get a second chance to step back into her life. Comfort, she had finally realized, was nothing without respect. I read the message twice, then closed my phone. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not vindication. Just a deep, steady quiet. She had chosen, and for once, the choice didn't involve me. The aftermath unfolded like a slow unwinding. She kept her promise. She paid her bills. She took extra shifts. She stopped asking anyone else to carry her weight. Word drifted back through the same grapevine that had once delivered gossip of her collapse. She's managing now. Different. Quieter. Older somehow. I didn't seek her out. But when we crossed paths at the grocery store, at the post office, she nodded at me with a calm I'd never seen before. Not regret. Not longing. Just acknowledgement. People asked me if I'd take her back. Some assumed it was inevitable. That's the story they wanted. The wronged man finally restored, the woman repentant, the couple reconciled. They wanted melodrama, symmetry. But life is rarely symmetrical. My answer was always the same. No, not because I hated her. Not because I wanted her punished forever. But because something fundamental had shifted. Respect, once denied, could not simply be glued back together. We were not who we had been. And that, I realized, was the real revenge. Not watching her suffer, not hearing apologies, not even watching Paul slink away into obscurity. It was this, knowing that time itself had done the work. She had come face to face with the truth that love without respect is worthless, and comfort without labor is a cage. She had learned it not because I told her, but because life itself taught her. I walked away with something stronger than vindication, freedom. In my small rented room, the notebook sat closed now. The pages filled with debts and receipts had done their work. They no longer needed to be read. The keychain lay beside it, a relic, not a wound. I kept them not as chains, but as reminders, proof that silence had been my sharpest tool, that absence had been the heaviest weight of all. The last time we spoke, it was on the street. She stopped me, looked me in the eye, and said, "I'll never rewrite this story." I nodded. Good. Then we walked in opposite directions. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. My life went forward, steadier, sharper. Hers did too, carrying the lessons carved into her by her own choices. The ultimate revenge had never been revenge at all. It was stepping back, letting the truth reveal itself, and refusing to return to a place where my worth was invisible. Comfort, in the end, had turned into her prison. And silence had been my freedom.